5, 6, 7, 8.
Welcome to the EX podcast, where I talk with business leaders, authors, and disruptors on how the workplace is changing. This podcast brings a different lens to the conversation around HR transformation, company culture, and employee engagement. It offers a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Why? Because companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talent. It is time we put people first to rehumanize the workplace. Simply because leaders who don't care about their employees will eventually be surrounded by people who don't care about their business. Today's guest is Elizabeth Gartner, an employee experiences leader at Microsoft. Today, with Elizabeth, we talk about what the employee experience means at Microsoft, what the employee journey looks like in the organization, what is Microsoft's 7-step methodology to bring the employee experience to life? What are the main themes important to employees to feel engaged? How the company approaches manager training and development. We also talk about employee experience, automation and personalization, as well as employee data and analytics. Elizabeth shares also tips on where to start in your EX journey and which pitfalls to avoid. Support for this podcast is brought to you by Life Guides. Life Guides helps companies increase employee engagement and reduce presenteeism loss by providing a human-to-human network to help employees through their life challenges. Life Guides pairs people who are going through a specific life challenge with guides who have gone through the exact same life challenge. As Match.com pairs people for love and DoctorsOnDemand.com finds doctors for patients, Life Guides matches a guide to each employee's specific life challenge. For employers, Life Guides offers a range of customized plans which support your employee families with one-on-one support, offers empathy, experienced guidance, and are highly affordable. Find out more at www.lifeguides.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Elizabeth. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it will help promote the content. If you want me to speak at your next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Elizabeth Gartner. Elizabeth is calling from Redmond in Washington State, and she's an employee experiences leader at Microsoft. Elizabeth, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What is your role at Microsoft, and tell us a bit more about what EX means within your organization.
Yeah, so my role is as a program manager of employee experiences, a small team within Microsoft dedicated to improvements and optimization of the employee experience. And what that means to Microsoft, we have a definition that's a little bit wordy, but I'll try it out, which is a sum total of various perceptions an employee has about their interactions in the company. And so we use that as a way to remind people it's an entire cycle. You know, they could be a customer and they have a perception of the customer, they have a perception of the company. And then as they get recruited, become a candidate, become an employee, even if they leave the company and decide to become an alumni, we have this huge amount of interaction with that individual, and to remind ourselves that those perceptions happen all the way throughout the journey, whether or not they're currently an employee.
And I like the definition because it's really articulated in the way that you put yourself in the shoes of the employee. It's not, looking at the employee life cycle from an HR perspective, but it's looking at it from an employee's perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe let's go through the employee journey, then the employee life cycle at Microsoft, and how you defined it.
Yeah, and like many other companies, it's a cycle that will be very familiar to most of us, right? That you could start as a customer, you are recruited, you become that candidate. There's an onboarding period where you're learning about the company and your role and how you can be successful. Hopefully that leads to performing, and that's your current role, but then also this kind of career enablement, the development of yourself and your skills. And then offboarding is a part of everybody's journey at some point, and there's that opportunity too for rehire. So when we talk about like redeployment of those skills and abilities, we've seen that industry trend really pick up in the last few years, that people leave within 2 years. That's very typical. And that's not just the tech industry, that's everywhere, is that whether or not they jump to a new role within your organization or they look for a brand new company, that 2-year span tends to be pretty typical. And there's some psychology and kind of org sociology work that shows that 2 years kind of matches our school schedule or the way that we were educated, so that you get to a point where you've finished a semester, a trimester, you've gone through a bunch of amazing opportunities, and then you get to change all your classes and you get to go on a summer vacation, and then you get to start all over again. So what we've seen, again, like many other companies and the research that we've been able to do, is most people will say they're in it for 2 years. And whether or not they get that new role or jump to a new company, we have to consider that entire life cycle of, did we develop? Were they performing? Would we rehire them? Is there an opportunity to bring their skills and capabilities back?
Is it something that is spoken about even during the interview process, and that is understood on both ends? Meaning that you talk very easily and openly with a candidate about, we understand that you may be here for 2 years. This is what we're going to do for you. We don't expect you to stay here for 40 years, but this is what we're offering you for whatever your lifespan might be at Microsoft. Is it an open communication that you have with recruits or prospective candidates?
That's a great question. I think it really depends on the organization and whether or not they have a structured learning and development program, or if they have, like a rotational program that you're being hired into, or if you're hired into a role for like a CVP, right? There's going to be different communications in any of those candidate conversations, where you might encourage the 2 years. You might say, we expect you to move quickly. We expect promotions. We expect this, and this. But Microsoft is very good at that open-ended, we're bringing you in for this, but we really want you to be a Microsoft hire. This amazing opportunity to come into our company. And if we're hiring you, it means we see potential and there's amazing opportunities. So I don't think we ever kind of showcase the 2 years. We'll say it, right? We'll say like, oh yeah, we know most people say 2 years, but we'd love you to stay longer. And right. So most of that advertising comes through as, we have learning and development opportunities. We have amazing programs. We would encourage you to stay, but we'd also encourage you to look within our 125,000 person company all over the world, and maybe join us in another role, or transfer to another country, transfer to another space.
And at least you understand and you're aware that of a short tenure might be with the company.
Yes.
All right. There are many companies that are oblivious of this, and they just think that it's a given that someone who joins the company is going to stay for the long term.
Oh, no. Yeah. And the research, as well as our own data, shows that whether or not you say that 2 years openly and whether or not you transfer, like, there are changes.
Yes.
It is very rare for somebody to stay in the same role in the same spot for a long period of time, right? Like, we're seeing that trend in all industries across the US right now. So, Microsoft is no different.
We spoke a few months ago when I was hosting the Employee Experience Summit in Seattle. And as you're going through the presentation, you highlighted some of the 7-step methodology to bring the employee experience to life at Microsoft. Could you go through that with us, and what are those 7 steps?
Of course. So I'll number them, and apologies for the list ahead of time. But the first one is about bringing together stakeholders. And we've always encouraged diverse perspectives. We've said, don't just bring the people who get to make the decisions. Bring together stakeholders who are passionate about your work or would love to inspire something exciting. And we've used this great example from our onboarding opportunities where we had a gentleman who runs a coffee cart at the beginning of our new employee orientations here in Puget Sound. And he volunteered to be a part of this community to talk about improvements of our new employee orientation, like how onboarding should go. And we, some people said, well, but he's not a decision maker. He's a vendor. There's some questions like, what is he bringing to the table? And we encouraged it. We said, no. He sees the experience more than anybody else. It's bright and early in the morning. People brand new to Microsoft. They may or may not have found his coffee cart easily, right? Like, we used that example because he had amazing ideas about the program and how they could turn up the energy and the excitement really early in the morning with a whole bunch of new hires.
I like it. Be inclusive, not exclusive.
Exactly. And really just asking for those volunteers. Those are stakeholders too. Someone who is passionate about your experience, whether or not there's an obvious connection, is still a very valuable asset when you're brainstorming things like this.
Do you try to have a sort of a sample of many of the teams or departments that a new hire may touch, or is it just whomever volunteers is welcome to the process?
So we encouraged anyone that volunteers, but of course we reached out to those organizations and stakeholders who were working on the program itself. So, we didn't exclude anybody who is already working on the program, but we tried to have this, big participation, ask for volunteers, reach out beyond that normal community that would have gotten together to brainstorm things for orientation.
All right.
Yeah. And so then number 2 is about evangelizing the concept of employee experience and redefining what opportunities look like. So in these situations, it would be bringing all those stakeholders together in a meeting, in a workshop, in an email, in a newsletter, and just saying, here's what employee experience means to Microsoft. And then we want opportunities that look like this. And so it might mean, let's say we don't have any budget to make changes, or we have a V team of 5 people, or we have a V team of 100 people, and we have lots of budget, is defining some of those opportunities to say there are boundaries on what we'd like to brainstorm, and that's okay. But being upfront, we found in a lot of our research about that transparency was key, making sure that you were upfront about those things so that if somebody said, oh, you should drive everybody into Microsoft new employee orientation in the Batmobile, there's a budgetary risk there, right? And we should level set and make sure that we have those guidelines ahead of time. But we would never stop the brainstorming. You just have to provide that transparency up front. And then what that builds is number 3, making sure that you have those opportunities and improvements ranked so that you choose kind of like your top 3 favorites or your top 3 exciting things that do fit those guidelines. And then number 4, design with employees in the center. So a lot of design thinking methodology goes into this, and we referenced that a lot in my presentation at the EX Summit in Seattle recently. But we said, designing with employees at the center is sometimes lost once you have these amazing ideas to focus on the employee experience. If you bring in the wrong stakeholders, you might actually optimize the opportunity for somebody else. So making sure that employees' experience is what you focus on.
Good.
Then number 5, implementing and launching those opportunities. They do not have to be perfect. And you have to be really careful to say, if you try to get it perfect, you might already be outdated. So then 6 is about reviewing and measuring constantly. And 7 is to respond and make changes accordingly. Because we found that by sharing and being agile, that those changes can become inspirational and much more of a shared solution, kind of an amazing opportunity to build on something quickly versus waiting for the perfect thing to happen before you ever launch.
Just like you have been in the tech industry for quite some time, and I'm very familiar with the Agile process, but it might be something a bit discomforting, I would say, or scary for companies who are not really comfortable with the idea of experimentation before having a final or polished product. Right? What is your take on this, and how should companies embrace that agile mindset to just try a few things and see what the response is, and not so much focusing on we need to get this 100% finalized before we push it out?
Great question. And I feel like with most companies, there's going to be an element of risk to some programs. And so you might want to try out agile thinking on something that is not your compensation and benefits model. Maybe it's new employee orientation, something that you do frequently enough that you can make some quick changes, but maybe not to your annual board meeting, because that doesn't happen so quickly. And then if I think about the agile critical thinking process, to assess a situation, consider the evidence, and take action, that's really what we're asking for. An agile model just means that you give yourself the freedom to try something new. And using that logical next step to say, well, they didn't like that poster orange, but they love it blue, so maybe we should just make them all blue. Give yourself the opportunity or the space to do that by not purchasing 1,000 of the orange posters before you try them. It was just when we started to talk to other companies or even to our own teams internally about this methodology, most people say, oh, but this is super easy. It's just those 7 steps and bringing it all into play. But the thing we got caught up with most often is that we went with the first great idea. And it's still a great idea, but this opportunity to focus on that first great idea and make it better, the agile thinking and framework so that you can continue to iterate and make it better and better and better over time. That was always where we got hung up, is we got excited about that first great idea and everybody wanted to go all in. And we had to be very careful to stop them and remind them there are other great ideas. That was just your first one.
And the measurement and analytics step is critical because you need to be able to measure the impact of your initiatives on the business performance.
One of the things that we've noticed with any great scientific method or experiment that you're going to perform, you should have measurement already built in to understand whether or not you're successful. And another amazing human trait is, and there's a little bit of sarcasm there, is that we want to measure it after we've done it, and we don't always get a baseline. So having a measurement in place ahead of time, even some really creative measurements about, having people vote in the moment, whether or not you build an app, whether or not you count the number of smiles as somebody walks away from a coffee cart. There are amazing measurements that you can implement right away, and they don't always have to be expensive, intensive, data metrics and analytics. Instead, what we encouraged is that you just have some ahead of time, that if we're going to make these improvements, this is what we're going to try, have a measurement ready to go.
Yes.
So that at least you have something to review as you go through the process.
Yeah, the idea is to really identify measurable goals before you launch anything.
Yes. And even if you decide later that measurement doesn't work or it didn't give you the information you needed, that's okay too. Let that be agile as well.
Yeah.
But what we found is that if you try to make those measurements after you've launched something new, you will almost always skew to the positive because you'll be watching the thing that improved and trying to measure those things instead of deciding those measurements up front, launching the program, and then seeing if those were the right measures. We've just seen a lot of successful programs, quote unquote, because someone chose the measurements afterwards.
Microsoft is a huge organization, obviously.
Yes.
When you launch and you test different initiatives, how large do you go? Do you pick a very specific business or team or department to experiment it first? What is the process there?
It all depends on the change that we're trying to launch. And so new employee orientation is a great example of that. Covers a lot of different employees from a lot of different organizations, but it doesn't cover anybody who is outside of Puget Sound for that new employee orientation. So you might be, geologically or geographically ring-fenced, but you have some other opportunities to scale across organizations and employee differences, whether it's level and age and role and capability. But what we've seen an awesome opportunity in is these test environments, similar to what you just said, Stephen, of we might launch something in a specific organization. We might try an app just for a week. We might trial a product for people who sign up saying that they're interested in the beta. You might choose a small group of experts to test or do a service rehearsal before you launch it broadly. And so we very rarely do our very for population of Microsoft, but we might choose an entire country. We might choose an entire organization. We might choose a specific leader and all of their directs. So we found ways to test, and we've tried to use different scenarios, different kind of user experience testing to provide us the insight we need before we go broad throughout the organization. But if you have a small enough team, you have a wonderful opportunity to just try it with everybody all up front, but maybe do it for a day or a week and provide yourself those insights and ability to change.
What are some of the themes that are the most important to employees to feel engaged at Microsoft?
That's a great question. And I'll start with Kathleen Hogan's 5 Ps that she recently posted on LinkedIn about purpose, pride, people, perks, and pay, the 5 Ps. And that's all about employee fulfillment and what we share with other companies when we say these are our best practices. But then as we dove into the 6 themes that were important for Microsoft, there are elements within those 5. So we said, number 1, it was about innovation, excellence, and impact. The ability to make amazing technology that empowers people around the world. We said, number 2, it was about the ease of working and the ability for somebody to just do their day job, right? If you can't use Wi-Fi and you're expected to join a virtual meeting, it's really painful. So ease of working was really important. Number 3 was career enablement, to not just provide those opportunities for promotion, but to give learning and development opportunities that might be outside your scope today. So we talked a lot about corporate employees like myself in HR having the opportunity to learn to code. Number 4 is about inspiring environments. We talked about that as the physical environment as well as the digital and the cultural environment that you're producing in a company. And then 5 is about strength of a Microsoft deal, which those align really well with Kathleen's 5 Ps, those pay and perks that we're talking about. It's not just your salary that we're talking about, but also the benefits, the discounts, the amazing opportunities you have on campus. The office building has that inspiring environment. There's a deal. It's a package that we're selling. And then 6 is about leadership trust, that authenticity, respect, and trust of our senior leaders.
How far or how deep do you go in customization of the employee experience across different countries or different regions around the world?
This data actually came from every survey we currently do at Microsoft, which we have tons of data from lots of different organizations, whether it's our IT function or our real estate and facilities, our security groups, our HR teams, we combined the information and verbatims from all those surveys to come up with these 6. So this was all geographies, this was all populations, all levels, all across the company, as long as you filled out one of our surveys.
Let's talk about data then. You do surveys on a regular basis. Do you capture any other type of data within Microsoft to better understand employee behaviors and how they navigate through not only the physical space, but how much time they spend collaborating, for instance, versus working on individual tasks, what they want in terms of career advancements or training? How far do you go into employee data and insights and then development?
Oh, that's a great question. So we have tons of data, and I'd actually say that's one of our weaknesses, is that there's just so
well, what do you
much
do with that? Yeah.
I mean, there's so much information. And so when you asked that question, I started listing the teams in my mind that have a piece of the puzzle.
Uh-huh.
But I'll probably talk most about our workplace analytics function, and a team that is actually starting to define the size of individual networks, reminding you when you have off hours, how much focus time you have, how much collaboration time you've had, and then when did you actually sign off. Mm-hmm. It reminds me similarly to sleep apps that are so popular right now. Uh-huh. It'll tell you, oh yeah, you slept for 8 hours, but how much of it was actually quality sleep? And then could you have been sleeping better if it was a little colder, or, if you were in a different setting, or if you had some sort of noise in the background? That's what our workplace analytics team is trying to do for the workplace. And we've just seen some amazing data and how they're trying to build that off of the tools we use today. So between Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Teams as collaboration and sharing tools, they're trying to show you the size of your network, what you're spending time doing, and then opportunities to do it even better, kind of tips and best practices.
Earlier, you talked about offboarding as a part of the journey, which is very interesting. Many companies don't really focus on the onboarding. And we talk about exit interviews and so forth, but it's not so much about what is the offboarding experience looks like. The offboarding experience is not usually a main point of focus for organizations. How is it different at Microsoft, and what do you do to make it more valuable for both the organization and to the employee as well?
So we still haven't perfected it, but we realized it was an amazing opportunity, the other end of the life cycle, shall we say, that if we don't do it well, if we aren't respectful, and if we don't do it efficiently, if we don't provide an amazing experience even in that moment, probably one of the toughest moments of your adult life, that we lose some amazing people just because of the way we treated them as they walk away. And that might have been voluntarily, it might have been involuntarily, but as Microsoft started to study that process, that end-to-end life cycle, lots of people love to focus on onboarding. It's exciting, it's fun. If you do it well, people keep their excitement, and they might gain some amazing loyalty to the company because of how we treated them in the beginning. But we saw an amazing opportunity, and I keep saying the word amazing. I'm trying to use a different. But what we saw this opportunity to jump in to the offboarding space, which no one wanted to look at, because it's a tough experience. It's the tough part of your journey. But again, if we did it respectfully and efficiently, we found some amazing gains, some amazing opportunities to help people in that moment that mattered for them.
There's one local company here in Indianapolis that does, every time somebody leaves, again, on their own terms, the company, they do a graduation part, meaning that they see it as a way that this individual has learned and contributed within the company, but it's a gift to have provided that person a place to grow personally and professionally. And let's celebrate that step, even though we may be sad that he or she's leaving.
Yeah. Yeah, we've started to do thank you emails, and it's a test population, just as we talked about. We've started sending out thank yous. Thank you for your contribution to Microsoft, and reminding you how influential you were when you were here. And we send those out about a month after somebody's left, if they've left us a personal email. And they don't always, and that's okay. And we've started to talk about what that means, and if we can standardize it further, if we can provide more assistance, should we provide more assistance? But we're a big company, and we've started to brainstorm some ideas, some of those things that we could do to improve that experience. And those are much tougher in our minds than the onboarding, because you're not with us, and we might not have a way to contact you. And so finding those opportunities in that space, the things that we can improve, is much more difficult. And exciting that local company in Indianapolis has figured out a way to do this fun graduation party.
It's pretty neat. As companies who have embraced the employee experience concept for quite some time, and they mature in the process, they're looking more and more into how far can we customize the experience. It's not a one size fit all for everybody, but how far can we customize even to the individual level what their own experience might be.
Yeah.
How far is Microsoft in that area, and how do you balance the automation of some of the processes to provide that customized experience to the employees with the human touch and human components?
So as a technology company, we are known for trying to automate everything.
Yeah.
But then, build into our tools a way to customize. We are constantly trying to make that better. And how do we provide the right amount of automation so that people get the standardized process and all the information that they need, but customized enough so that they feel that the human touch, that authenticity from us. And so it's depended on the process or the practice, but anywhere in the employee lifecycle, we've started to talk about where those opportunities are. If there's the element of efficiency and that's what's best for the employee experience, then we try to focus on the automation. If the moment needs a human touch and you need to speak to a human, then we want to give you a human to talk to. If you just want to talk to a chat bot and ask a quick question and have it look up a policy for you, we're trying to provide that service as well. And so really what we've tried to focus on at Microsoft is the opportunities for whatever you'd like customized. We're trying to provide you that venue or that channel to get the exact service you're asking for.
How does Microsoft approach the training and the coaching of managers to be that middle but critical elements of between the employees and what the experience is to what the organization wants to accomplish?
That's a great question. And I'd say we went threefold, which is there is training and development. There's learning opportunities that we provide, trainings that are required that managers go through as a first-time manager or a long-time manager, just trying to update themselves on processes and tools. But then we also try to provide resources in those tough moments that don't happen frequently. So whether that's HR support or a talking guide, a video that shows how to have a difficult conversation, it's providing that extra structure and support in really tough situations. And then the third is trying to empower managers. So we can never get the learning programs perfect for every single individual. It's one of those things we wish we could customize at scale, but it's hard to do, is that we're going to have different strengths and weaknesses with every manager in the company. And so how do we empower you to find the resources you need or ask for help? That's what we're really focusing on now, is how do we help you report a concern? How do we help you have a promotion conversation? How do we encourage you to use the right performance and rewards philosophy? So empowerment, learning and development, and then extra support in those tough moments.
What tips would you give to our listeners on where to start in their EX journey and maybe some of the pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, I'll actually give the 3 best practices that we do in all of our employee experience workshops. The first one was to focus on what employees value, not just what they need. And there's a bunch of research around this about functional opportunities, that less than a third of the impact is functional, while more than 2/3 is emotional. So you spend more time emphasizing the empathy than actually talking about what the employee needs. So use the value over the need and determine the difference. It was a big one, very difficult in practice, but an interesting exercise to remind people that 2/3 of that is about their emotional value.
Yeah.
So then balancing employee freedom and organizational control with transparency. And very similar to a comment I made earlier about if you've ranked the top 3 things and one of them is not possible, be transparent about why it's not possible, because other amazing ideas come out of the reasoning why not. So we've encouraged that every time you have, and I just use top 3, but you can use top 10, top 5, whatever, that explain why you can or cannot make it happen or where you're stuck, because then those obstacles can be broken down together. And then the last one that we always used to use is a reminder that things will improve just because you're focusing on them. And again, there's tons of psychology and org behavior examples that by showing you care improves the numbers. Actually just encourages people that you're looking and you care about them and that you're trying to approach something with empathy can also just be a best practice. You listened, you tried, you're being transparent about it, amazing things can happen.
What are some of the pitfalls that you avoid, or some of the hard lessons that you learned along the way?
We found a lot about measurement are our pitfalls. And I'll say this because earlier I explained we have tons of information, but sometimes we don't use it. And that's a pitfall of we have amazing data, but also, so you drive another path. I'd also say a pitfall we keep running into is that when everyone agrees with your presentation, no one will fight with you philosophically that it's the right thing to treat employees well, but they want tactical next steps. And sometimes just that process of asking employees what those things are that they can fix is overwhelming. It doesn't feel tactical enough. They'd rather just have those top 3 things and be told how to do them and sign off, say, I approve, I give you budget, go fix it. But that we've actually found that pitfall is if the leader doesn't do it and show that leadership trust in the moment, one of our 6 themes, if they don't show that authenticity and then the transparency around their choices, that actually ruins part of the process. That research has shown you have an amazing ability to influence your organization and show you care, but if the leader wants to step out of the helpful, and actually there's less dramatic improvement.
We talked about employee data. I would assume it's pretty easy, as you said. I mean, you have a large volume of qualitative data that you have access to. How do you collect qualitative data from employees? Do you do focus groups? Do you do coffee talks? And how often? Usually, what's the size of those? How do you collect that qualitative feedback when it's very easy? I would say it's probably very easy for you to get the quantitative data.
Yeah, so we have tons of methods and mediums, and that's what leads to our monstrous amount of data. We have lots of different tools that will assist us in this, and so Yammer is a big one. We watch other social media platforms. We have workplace analytics through Outlook, Microsoft Teams. We have data even through our other apps. You can provide feedback on our products, that you can provide that qualitative data about the product, but also the experience it's providing. Each of our service teams in the corporate groups, so whether it be finance, HR, our IT groups, oh my goodness, I'm trying to go through all the names while I'm thinking of them, but our comms groups, we have strategy teams, anybody who has their own alias will be provided qualitative feedback. And it's just how they choose to kind of inform themselves or digest it. So it might be a survey, it might be a focus group, it might be a UX experience where somebody's testing something directly and then providing that feedback. It might be an all hands or a Q&A. They might have leadership talks, and those frequencies depend on the organization. So sometimes that happens weekly or monthly. Sometimes they do a stand-up daily with their teams. Sometimes they share that data. Sometimes they put it into a forum where we can then use it all up. But there's data everywhere. So it's actually just trying to focus on the right data and getting a good mixture of that qualitative and quantitative from all different sources.
One mistake that many organizations make is to look for feedback, not to be ready to analyze the data and come up with a plan in a very short time frame. Right, where all the data that they may collect will take time to analyze, and then 6 months after they come up with a plan, but that data may be just outdated or no longer valid, or just that the employees were expecting something much quicker, and now suddenly they feel a bit disengaged, or they have a lack of trust in management because it took so long to come up with a plan. What's the turnarounds at Microsoft to collect and then propose a plan or act very specifically on some of the things or issues that they see?
Well, I think this will be similar to many other companies as well, as it depends on the group and how big they are. So if this is a Satya Nadella CEO size email, then it might take some time. And we might gather tons of data. We might do it for years before we announce something to stakeholders, the board of directors, or in a Satya Q&A. But if it's a smaller team and they wanted to approach something quickly, say that within a month they want to have improvements to a process before they launch a tool, they might say, we're going to meet every week, or an exciting opportunity to say, if you can finish this in this amount of time, if you can write a white paper, if you can create 3 different presentations and take it to these 3 organizations, there are all sorts of tactics and abilities, depending on the organization that you're in, to encourage that brainstorming power. And so our employees are capable of amazing things if you give them the chance. So what we've encouraged in a lot of those turnaround times is just, if you state a turnaround time, you have to do it. So if you've told everybody that you're going to get back to them in a week or 2 weeks or 3 months, it should happen in that time frame, because then that feeds back to that transparency piece.
Yeah, set expectations ahead of time.
That's right. And even if you don't have the answer, you respond and say, we don't have this right, here's where we got stuck. That transparency is key.
Before we wrap up our conversation today, let me ask you some fun questions. If you were to invite a historical figure to dinner, who would you pick and why?
So this is a recency bias. I recently read the book Crazy Horse by Joseph M. Marshall. And I love the idea of the alternate perspective of what I learned in history class and then what I just learned about Crazy Horse and what happened to the Lakota people. I would love to have him for dinner. Now, based on the book, there is proof that he would probably not like to go to a dinner party, that he very much like to be alone in the wilderness, but that's still my choice.
All right, so let me put you under the spotlight, because you talked about experimentation and transparency as well. What was your biggest screw up at work, and what did you learn from it?
I would say there was a termination meeting early in my career that I did not give the manager the best instructions. So an employee did not get the respect they deserved in that meeting. And I would say the feeling I had after that meeting, this like complete and utter sense of failure, made me learn and become very passionate about the offboarding experience, which I then got to run that end-to-end later on in my career, just recently. But I've never forgotten that termination meeting. Like the look in his face, the explanation that I had to give, even though I could tell he was having kind of an emotional breakdown, I could have done so much better. and provided such a better experience for that employee. And so because of that, it led to this amazing opportunity in my career to say, no, I should fix offboarding all up and help Microsoft do this as a much, much more efficient and respectful process in the future.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Farming.
That's quite interesting. And why is that?
I don't think I'd be good at it. I just love this idea of traditional farming and a sustainable ecosystem. If you can get all the pieces of the puzzle correct, that you can create something amazing and it's all natural. So I've always kind of pictured it, but I haven't gotten the chance. Nobody's given me land yet to try this out.
That's funny. I mean, from a Midwest perspective, that's a very West Coast answer.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm originally Midwest, so that's where I had the land, and then I moved to Seattle. So.
Here you go. All right. What sound or noise do you love?
I'm going to go really cheesy with this one and say it's either my mother's voice or thunderstorms.
What sound or noise do you hate?
People licking their fingers.
Oh, that's cool. All right. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Oh, that one's tough. I would say there's this little cabin in upstate New York where my husband and I went for our wedding that I absolutely adore. It feels like a mixture of his kind of New York roots and my Michigan up north experiences in the summer, and it's just the perfect spot for us.
Good. All right, so you're from the Midwest. What is the thing that you like the most about the Northwest and Washington State, and what is the thing that you like the least?
Okay, so this is really geeky of me to say that my favorite thing about the Northwest is the fact that we have compost, recycle, and trash available almost everywhere you go.
Yeah, I saw that in Seattle. I loved it.
I love it, and I know it's geeky, but I've always been a huge fan of compost and worms, and so this idea. And then did you say what was the other thing about the Northwest? The thing I don't like about the Northwest?
Yeah, so something that you like the least, yes.
Oh, the drivers. I would say it might be a city thing. I've lived in Atlanta and Michigan and the East Coast. I've lived all over, but at this point I have never experienced such terrible traffic as what happens here in Seattle. And I would say everyone goes the speed limit no matter what lane you're in. And so you just get these crazy backup scenarios because everybody wanted to go the exact same speed, and then nobody knows how to switch lanes.
Yeah, it's very congested. That's for sure.
It's terrible.
All right. What is the way for our listeners to follow you and anything that is happening around culture and employee experience at Microsoft?
So there's a bunch of ways for listeners to follow Oft. We have Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook feeds. You can follow individual leaders like Satya Nadella, Kathleen Hogan, Scott Guthrie. You can also, one of my favorites, is following the hashtag Microsoft Life on Instagram, because you get employee experiences, which of course I love, and some of the leadership opportunities as well. So people who are at amazing events, great opportunities, and they take a picture and give a little caption, hashtag Microsoft Life.
Any last word of advice or wisdom for our listeners?
Many of our employee experience predictions go smoothly. And like we talked about earlier, everyone agrees, but they get tied up on the tactical. Don't want anyone to be discouraged. The easiest advice that works with most of our managers and leaders at Microsoft was to ask employees what they need, to rank those things that they need on whether or not you can accomplish it. So do not be discouraged. It's there. Employee experience can be improved. Make some wonderful things happen.
Love it. Nice way to conclude our conversation today. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being with us on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.